Millions of fans watched Green Bay win 5 NFL championships in 7 seasons during the 1960s, including the first 2 Super Bowls ever played, built by a coach whose name now sits on the trophy itself. Titletown became a phrase, then a legend, then a permanent part of how America talks about winning. But the dynasty that built that word paid for it the same way every dynasty in this story eventually has. A gambling suspension that nearly ended a Hall of Fame career before it peaked. A coach who died within months of his own diagnosis. A hero whose most famous night ended with him falling off a roof decades later. This is where the Green Bay Packers' Lombardi dynasty really ended up. One is the backup receiver who wasn't even supposed to play in the biggest game of his life, and who turned a hangover into the answer to one of football's most enduring trivia questions. Max McGee caught the first touchdown pass in Super Bowl history, a 37-yard grab from Bart Starr, and finished that game with 7 catches for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns despite entering the season as a fourth-string afterthought who had caught only 4 passes all year. Born in Battle Creek, Michigan in 1932, McGee played 11 seasons in Green Bay after serving 2 years as an Air Force pilot mid-career. And by January of 1967, he was 34 years old and quietly bearing down on retirement, not expecting to see the field at all against the Kansas City Chiefs. According to the legend that McGee himself helped spread for decades, he spent the night before the game-breaking curfew with teammate Paul Hornung and 2 flight attendants, crawled back to the hotel around 6:30 in the morning, and was still hungover when starting receiver Boyd Dowler separated his shoulder on Green Bay's second offensive drive, forcing McGee to borrow a teammate's helmet because he hadn't brought his own to the sideline. He retired after that season and built a second career as a restaurant entrepreneur and Packers radio broadcaster, becoming one of the most beloved alumni voices in franchise history for the next 3 decades. On October 11, 2007, Max McGee fell from the roof of his suburban Minneapolis home while cleaning out a gutter and died from his injuries at age 75. Max McGee turned one impossible night into the answer to a trivia question people are still asking 60 years later. Max McGee's own ending had nothing to do with football at all, just an ordinary chore on an ordinary rooftop. The same randomness that had made him a legend showing up one final time to take him. 2 is the halfback so versatile that Lombardi himself called him the best all-around back to ever play the game, right before the same league suspended him for an entire season over money he bet on football. Paul Hornung won the 1961 NFL Most Valuable Player Award and helped Green Bay capture 4 championships. A Heisman Trophy winner at Notre Dame nicknamed Golden Boy, who ran, caught passes, and kicked field goals in an era when few players did all 3. Born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1935, Hornung was the first overall pick in the 1957 draft. And by 1963, he was one of the most recognizable stars in the entire NFL, which made it all the more shocking when Commissioner Pete Rozelle suspended him and Detroit's Alex Karras for the full season after both men admitted to betting on NFL games, including their own. Hornung accepted the punishment, agreed to stay away from Las Vegas and the Kentucky Derby as a condition of reinstatement, and returned in 1964 to help Green Bay reach 2 more championships before a neck injury forced his retirement in 1966, keeping him off the field the day his own team won Super Bowl I. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1986, despite the suspension, and spent decades afterward as a popular broadcaster and public speaker, remembered as fondly for his personality as for his statistics. In his final years, Hornung's family confirmed he was suffering from dementia, and researchers later found that his brain, donated for study, showed signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Paul Hornung died in his hometown of Louisville on November 13, 2020, at age 84. Hornung was, in Lombardi's own words, the most versatile weapon in the history of the sport. Paul Hornung spent his final years losing his memory to the same violence that had made him the most electrifying, all-around player of his entire generation. If Hornung's suspension is the detail that surprised you, hit subscribe, because the next man on this list scored the first rushing touchdown in Super Bowl history and never once slowed down until the moment it finally, unexpectedly, caught up with him. 3 is the fullback whose punishing running style powered Lombardi's signature play and whose tension with his own coach never fully cooled even decades after both men had left the game behind. Jim Taylor won the 1962 NFL MVP award, leading the league with 1,474 rushing yards that season, a mark that stood as Green Bay's franchise record for 41 years, and scored the first rushing touchdown in Super Bowl history in the Packers' win over Kansas City. Born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1935, Taylor became the punishing centerpiece of Lombardi's famous power sweep, a bruising runner who reportedly welcomed contact rather than avoided it, dragging tacklers forward on nearly every carry across 9 seasons in Green Bay. His relationship with Lombardi grew strained by his final years with the team, driven partly by contract disputes and Taylor's decision to sign with the expansion New Orleans Saints for the 1967 season, a move that some teammates said Lombardi never fully forgave. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1976, the very first player from Lombardi's championship era to receive the honor, and remained a frequent, beloved presence at Packers alumni events at Lambeau Field for decades afterward. On October 13, 2018, Jim Taylor died unexpectedly at a hospital in his hometown of Baton Rouge at age 83, with the team saying only that the cause was not immediately known. Taylor set a franchise rushing record that stood for 4 decades using nothing but sheer physical punishment. Jim Taylor's death arrived suddenly and without warning, the same way he'd always run the football, leaving no time for the kind of goodbye a man with his history in the game might have expected to get. 4 is the quarterback whose sneak in the frozen ice bowl became as legendary as anything Lombardi ever coached, and whose final years were stolen by the same kind of cascading health collapse that claimed so many men on this list. Bart Starr won 5 NFL championships and both of the first 2 Super Bowls, earning MVP honors in each, a former 17th round afterthought out of Alabama, who became, under Lombardi's guidance, the most decorated quarterback of his era. Born in Montgomery, Alabama in 1934, Starr credited Lombardi directly with teaching him that discipline and preparation could overcome any physical shortcoming, and he rewarded that faith by going a perfect 9-0 in the playoffs across his career, punctuated by a bitterly cold January 1967 quarterback sneak that won the legendary Ice Bowl game against Dallas. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1977 and spent decades afterward as one of the most universally respected ambassadors the sport has ever produced, widely described by teammates and opponents alike as a man whose class off the field matched his execution on it. In September of 2014, Starr suffered a serious stroke, followed shortly afterward by a second stroke and a heart attack that same year, beginning a long public decline that left him increasingly frail at Packers alumni events in his final years. Bart Starr died in Birmingham, Alabama on May 26, 2019, at age 85, becoming the third of Lombardi's dozen Hall of Fame players to die within the span of just 8 months, following Jim Taylor and offensive tackle Forrest Gregg. Starr authored one of the most complete and decorated careers any quarterback in NFL history has ever had. Bart Starr spent his final 5 years fighting a body that had finally started failing him all at once, the same year his own generation of Lombardi's champions began disappearing in a cluster nobody could have scripted. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe, because the next man on this list terrified opposing offenses so completely that teammates called him a walking contradiction, gentle at home and terrifying on Sundays. 5 is the middle linebacker who anchored Green Bay's defense through all 5 championships, and whose off-field warmth stood in almost comic contrast to the snarling, gap-toothed menace he became the moment a game started. Ray Nitschke played all 15 of his NFL seasons in Green Bay, was named MVP of the 1962 NFL championship game, and helped anchor the defense through both of Lombardi's Super Bowl victories, becoming the first defensive player from that dynasty ever elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1978. Born in Elmwood Park, Illinois in 1936, Nitschke lost both of his parents by the time he was 13 and was raised afterward by his two older brothers. A hard start that teammates later said shaped the intensity he carried onto the field for the rest of his career. On Sundays, he removed his false front teeth for a gummy mouthpiece that curled his mouth into a permanent snarl and wrapped his forearms in thick padding and tape. Terrifying enough that a young college linebacker named Dick Butkus said watching him win a championship game MVP award as a teenager helped inspire his own career. Bart Starr himself once called Nitschke a classic Jekyll and Hyde, a thoughtful, caring presence away from the game who seemed to genuinely enjoy hitting people the moment the whistle blew. He retired in 1972, stayed in Green Bay for the rest of his life, kept his home phone number listed in the local phone book for fans who wanted to call, and briefly ran a car dealership where he filmed his own commercials alongside a dog he'd named Butkus after his old rival. On March 8, 1998, while driving with his daughter and infant granddaughter to a friend's house near his winter home in Naples, Florida, Nitschke felt sharp chest pains and pulled into a gas station, where he suffered a fatal heart attack at age 61. Nitschke terrorized the league's best fullbacks for 15 seasons, using a snarl he built specifically for Sundays. Ray Nitschke's last afternoon was spent exactly the way his happiest ones always had been, in a car with his own family, before his heart simply stopped without any warning at all. If you've made it this far, and you're wondering who built this entire dynasty around all five of these men, the last name on this list is the coach who never got to see how any of their stories actually ended. 6 is the head coach, whose name now sits permanently on the trophy itself, and whose own ending arrived so fast that the league barely had time to process. He was sick before he was already gone. Vince Lombardi coached Green Bay for 9 seasons, winning 5 NFL championships, including the first 2 Super Bowls, and compiling a career-winning percentage that remains one of the highest in professional football history. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1913, the son of an Italian immigrant butcher, Lombardi didn't get his first head coaching job until age 45, arriving in Green Bay in 1959 to take over a franchise that had gone 1-10-1 the previous season and turning it into a dynasty within 3 years. He stepped down as head coach after Super Bowl II to focus on his general manager duties, then left Green Bay entirely in 1969 to coach the Washington Redskins, leading them to their first winning season in 14 years in what would become his final year on any sideline. In June of 1970, Lombardi was admitted to Georgetown University Hospital with digestive problems he had reportedly ignored for years, and doctors discovered an aggressive, fast-growing colon cancer. Surgeons removed a 2-foot section of his colon, but exploratory surgery a month later revealed the cancer was terminal. Vince Lombardi died at Georgetown University Hospital on September 3, 1970, just 71 days after his initial diagnosis at age 57. He was posthumously inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame months later, and the NFL renamed its championship trophy in his honor before that same season's Super Bowl had even been played. Lombardi built the single most quoted, most referenced coaching legacy in the history of American sports in less than a decade. Vince Lombardi was gone so quickly after his diagnosis that he never got to see Hornung's suspension fully fade from memory, never saw Starr's final decline, and never once got to watch the trophy that now carries his name get lifted by anyone else. They rest now in a Minnesota rooftop that gave way beneath an ordinary chore, in a Louisville hometown that watched dementia take a golden boy's memory, in a Florida gas station where a heart simply stopped mid-drive, and in a Georgetown hospital bed that emptied out just 10 weeks after a routine checkup finally happened. 2 more are gone from a cluster of losses within the very same year, an entire generation of champions disappearing together the way they'd once won together. Titletown built its name on discipline, precision, and a coach who died before he ever got to see how completely his own name would outlive him. The Green Bay dynasty of the 1960s is still remembered as football's gold standard, and 6 decades later, the actual price of building that standard turned out to be paid in full by nearly every man who ever wore the number Lombardi once coached.